good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this Voices for Change panel, where our panelists will be sharing their stories on how race has impacted their experience here at the University of Iowa. I'm Liz Tovar, and I serve as Interim Associate Vice President for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion here at the university. And I also serve in another role on campus as Associate Athletics Director for Student Athlete Academic Services at Iowa, and have been here for the past 7 years. And tonight's event really offers us an opportunity to build on a feature story for our university, and that's really to hear from the individuals who have been members of our community. You'll hear from them directly, and also before we jump into the panel, I want to share some brief housekeeping announcements for everyone. We have 5 esteemed panelists who will be speaking this evening, and you are encouraged to submit questions for them. Please note that if you would like to submit a specific question to the panelists to respond to, we'll have time for that at the end. We also have some questions that are prepared for the group to get us started. And as they are speaking, we'll be making a list of stories referenced to share out to all of the attendees here tonight, in case you're interested in learning more about the specific incidents that have happened here on our campus. You'll also be directed to a survey at the conclusion of our program tonight to let us know your thoughts about this event, and also to come up with ideas for future content. So thank you so much for joining us this evening. The idea for tonight's program really came from one of our panelists, Brittany Brown, class of 2017. And I'll take this opportunity to have Brittany introduce herself and share her thoughts behind the creation of this event. As a side note, I have known Brittany since I believe her freshman year, actually. And so it's great to see you here, Brittany, tonight. Why don't you share your story?
Good evening. Good evening. I'm really excited to be here. My name is Brittany Brown, and before I go in and tell you a little bit about myself, I would be remiss to not give honor and acknowledgement. I grew up in a typical Black Baptist church, and when you go up to speak in front of the congregation, your first words must be first giving honor to God and the ministers and the roster, and so on and so on. Now, when I was younger, I understood the acknowledgement of God, but why did I have to say all the other names? Trust me, if you don't say the other names either, you would be getting a death stare. However, I now understand you can't speak on the future without giving knowledge to the people in the past. So to have giving people who have aided us to this moment. So with that being said, I would like to specifically give honor and respect to all the Black panelists who have brought about awareness and change of the issue of race on campus, who have lived through the worst eras than me, who are currently doing the work. And even at times when the work becomes mentally and emotionally taxing, thank you so much for your resiliency. I also would like to thank Iowa Center of Advancement and Heather Walensky specifically for her swift responsiveness to my call of action. I really do appreciate it. My name is Brittany Brown. I'm originally from Southern California. I came to Iowa in 2013. I graduated in 2017, 18. I honestly can't remember. It hasn't been that long, but I feel like I'm getting older. I now run track professionally for Adidas, and I currently live here and train here in Iowa City. I reached out to Heather in about March, April, maybe even June around that time, inquiring if we can have a panel to discuss the topic of race across the campus throughout the years. I said before, it's important to talk about the past so we can gain knowledge to go forward with the future. So as much as I'm excited to talk, I'm also excited to listen to the stories, to hear you guys' questions and be enveloped in this conversation. I just thought it was just super important to have these discussions. I know a lot of times people are like, why do we always have to have these discussions? But it's important because as a person of color, as being a Black woman, like this is what I live every day. So having the discussions will bring about change and will bring about ideas to change. So I just thought it was super important to have this panel. So thank you guys all for being here and being in attendance, and I'm excited.
Thank you so much, Brittany. I really appreciate you putting forward this really great program. And with more than 100 people tuning in live right now, it's clearly a topic that's really resonated with our alumni and our friends. And speaking of alumni and friends, I am so happy to be joined by individuals who I've known very well for a very long time tonight. So I feel like I have the best job in the world right now. I'd like our panel to introduce themselves, and thank you so much for your willingness to come here tonight to share your stories and for being vulnerable, in this space today. So let us start with two of my favorite people, Lena and Michael Heel. They are co-authors of the book Invisible Hawkeyes, African Americans at the University of Iowa during the long civil rights era, and formerly faculty at the university. So if you could both take a moment just to introduce yourselves, your roles at the university, some of your insights. I've loved reading your book. And so Lena, I think we'll start with you.
Well, thank you so much, Liz. I'm so thrilled to be here. And I just want to echo my thanks to Brittany for inspiring this panel and this discussion. As Liz said, Michael and I had the privilege of spending 12 years at the University of Iowa. We began as assistant professors in the English department and in African American studies. And we were drawn by the rich history that we knew of in terms of English and the study of African American literature. But more than that, we were really drawn by the community that we found from the beginning of our process, interviewing and coming for a campus visit and hoping for our first tenure track jobs. And when I think about my time at Iowa, honestly, my heart is always filled up because it was positive in so many ways that you can't take for granted. It was more than just a moment of professional growth. It was a moment of profound support from faculty colleagues and friends, staff colleagues, and countless opportunities to work with amazing students. And that is more than many of us ever get in this life. So I had the opportunity to serve also in the capacity as senior associate to the president, and then as the chief diversity officer. And I could not be happier to see Liz Tovar in this position today. I think that the University of Iowa is in really good hands. And so that is a privilege as well. And the other thing I'll say before I turn things over to Michael, and just reflecting on the way that it prepared me for the work that I'm doing now at Washington and Lee as the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, is that I learned that when you have a community that you believe in, when you have an institution that stands on a rich history that may have wrinkles, but when you know that you are all aiming toward the same goals, it is truly a privilege to work toward those goals. And when I think of my community at the University of Iowa, it spills far beyond the campus to my church community, Bethel. I'm so honored to be here with Orville Townsend tonight. And I just want to say thank you to everyone who I had the chance to work with, because all of you just played such a profound and meaningful role in my development. And I know that I'll always be grateful for that.
Good evening, everyone. I echo the sentiments that my better half articulated and amplify them, hopefully, so that everyone all over the place can hear the message. One of the abiding memories of my time in Iowa City and at the University of Iowa is coming face to face with James Allen McPherson, the Pulitzer Prize winning novelist, first African-American fiction writer to win the Pulitzer Prize. But one of the things that McPherson talked about upon arriving in the Midwest, and we shared a triangle. James Allen McPherson is born in Georgia, educated in Massachusetts, and worked at the University of Iowa during a signature facet of his career. And as I was making my way to the Midwest, as someone who's unfamiliar with that terrain, there's a joke that goes around that when I told my father that we were going to take a job at the University of Iowa, he said, what did you lose out there? And that becomes a sort of running question of what did you lose? And the punchline is, I don't know how much I lost in Iowa, but I'm eternally grateful for all that I gained in Iowa. And one of the things that I gained is a familiarity with a concept that McPherson talked about, the concept of neighboring, the idea that individuals commit themselves, as Lena has suggested, to a shared enterprise, for better or for worse, in honesty and with a great resolve. And in many ways, that is the legacy of my time at the University of Iowa. What we find when we look through the history of the University of Iowa, and we'll talk about it more later, is an institution that was never overwhelmed by the sorts of prohibitions connected to segregation that afflicted many of the higher education institutions in this country, right? Like it's not an institution which is bereft of the ability for Black people to walk onto the campus. But that being said, their presence often provoked an ambivalent resolve, something that Phil Hubbard said echoed what was spoken of in higher governmental circles of the notion of benign neglect, right? Individuals showed up and existed. They sojourned, but they weren't always acknowledged as partners. And one of the things that I feel is sort of at the center of a lesson that I learned at the University of Iowa is an appreciation for the audacity and efficacy of collaboration, right? Like once we begin to understand the notion that from an intra-racial standpoint within racial groups, but also from an interracial standpoint, we must be energetic, zestful, and robust collaborators. We must be respectful participants. And I saw that firsthand. I understood that intimately at the University of Iowa. People who you run into there believe in partnership, believe in collaboration, and that will be forever one of the greatest resources of that institution is its commitment to collaboration and its undying reaping of those fruits. So grateful to be here, grateful to spend some time talking with you about the nature of collaboration at the University of Iowa.
Thank you so much, Michael and Lena. And I'm going to share, just a personal experience of mine between Michael, Lena, and Orville Towns, who I'll have introduce himself here in a little bit. When I came here to Iowa 7 years ago, like everyone, you're trying to find a sense of community. And those three individuals, including Billy Townsend, who is not on the line tonight, but between those four individuals, I really was able to find a sense of community here. And I think that's so important. So important to note. And so Orville, undergraduate class of 1967 and graduate class of 1972, would you take a moment to introduce yourself and how you found your way at Iowa and what the hallmarks were that you saw in terms of the Black experience here at Iowa? Orv, I think you're muted.
Excuse me, my wife's not here to guide me there. My name is Orville Thompson. And first, I'd like to thank you for inviting me to participate on this program. But I came to Iowa City and the University of Iowa in 1962 on a football scholarship. And my sophomore year, I began to participate on the university fencing team. So I had two sports. Now, I want you to get your calculate out because yes, I said 1962. So, you look at, the years that have passed, it's amazing. But I remember mostly about Iowa City is that I could walk across the campus, and many days when I walked across the campus, when I returned home or got where I was going, I had not seen another person that looked like me. So basically, there weren't many Blacks. There were only a couple Black faculty. And basically, the atmosphere was not that healthy. I mean, it was obvious that, Blacks were not welcome in our city. So we had to basically, stick together. But basically, I look back and what comes to my mind is two words: opportunity and possibilities. I came from East St. Louis, Illinois. My parents would not have been able to send me to college. So that athletic scholarship was an opportunity that I'm glad I had the opportunity to take advantage of. I eventually graduated and I went back and I got my master's degree in rehabilitation counseling. Acquired a job with vocational rehabilitation and got here in town and eventually became a supervisor. But I was able and fortunate enough to work for vocational rehabilitation for 42 and a half years until I retired in 2010. So I basically, I think very much about passing it on. I never would have been able to make it if I hadn't had people that were willing to help me to pass it, help me to get over whatever it was. And another thing I'd like to share is back in those days when I was in school, none of us had very much, but it's interesting what you can do if people are willing to share. I mean, there were like 3 cars in the group, but we all managed to get around and whatever we needed to do. So I think I look at the way it was then and I look at the way it is now. It's fantastic now. I mean, Liz, you guys, you've got a great thing. If we needed a tutor, we had to find our tutors and work them into the system. If a student needs a tutor today or whatever they need, I mean, it's there. I mean, they can even get snacks, So, hey, Liz, you're doing a heck of a job. Life is good, but on a serious note, when I say pass it on, I think that's something to focus on because to this day, if I can do anything to help someone, if they ask anything of me, that's the one thing that I ask them all to do is I want you to remember where we are right now, where we started and where we are. And down the road, if you get a chance, I want you to pass it on and help someone else.
Thank you so much, Orv. I really appreciate it. And that's what I call progress on campus, which is a very good thing. So moving through the decades, we now have Royce Kinnebrew from the class of 1998. Royce, could you share a bit about yourself and your experience here at Iowa?
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank everyone for the opportunity to share with you and be a part of this panel. I love my university so desperately, and it's always an opportunity to share any Hawkeye-ish niche. I really enjoy to do that. Well, I got to the University of Iowa coming from Detroit, Michigan, and didn't have the best academic background. And actually, after 3 semesters, I actually flunked out of the University of Iowa. I went back home to Detroit and I was there for a year. And I remember riding the bus, going to work to a minimum wage job. And there's a saying that the eyes are the windows to the soul. And I was on that bus with, Black folk and other people of color and poor folk. And that light just wasn't on. And I made a vow to myself that day. When I got back to the University of Iowa, I wanted to understand what can turn off that light in a person's eyes. And so when I got back to the university, I declared my major in English and African American World Studies. And I really learned what it meant to be a part of a community where we shared. People will often joke and talk about, man, you coming from Detroit, what's in Iowa City? I said, a good education and a very tight Black community. And that's what we were. And I had mentors at the university, whether they were upperclassmen or whether they were faculty members or the head of my English and my African American World Studies program that helped me get through and to understand. And that catapulted me into the work that I do now in education and diversity and inclusion with the federal government, talking about implicit bias, gender, equity, talking about issues with the LGBTQ community, and really just learning how to teach people to work and understand and tolerate and include people in their organizations better than they do right now. And so that's what I learned from Iowa, and it still goes on, and I'm really impacted about that and continue to go into that area as far as I can.
Thank you, Royce. I really appreciate that. And, you know, I'm going to circle back to Brittany now. Brittany, as a recent graduate here, do you see similar things that the panelists just talked about? You know, is it the same student experience today, or do you think that things have changed over time?
No, it's funny, as everyone's talking, I'm feeling like that community, that home, the stories just sound so familiar of when Orville was talking, like, you know, you kind of have that own niche there where you thrive. When I came to, I'm originally, like I said, I'm originally from Southern California. So I really honestly wasn't around a lot of like people of color or Black people. When I came to Iowa, like I was immersed in that community. I was there, like, you know, I tell people I kind of found my Blackness at Iowa, which is different because, you know, when I was back at home, like I went to predominantly all white school. But when I came here, you know, as much as I've grown in my athleticism and my academics, like I also gained a better understanding of what it is to be Black, how the experience is. I was able to talk about it. I was able to commune and be in community. So I can definitely attest to the community aspect of not just being a Black student athlete, but also a student, an athlete, like you had that community support around you. So yeah, I definitely, the stories relate. I attest to them. I resonate with the stories. And it's funny because it's years apart, but I still resonate with it.
Absolutely. I think that's really something to be said about, you know, not just the University of Iowa, but also the Iowa City community. You know, when you talk to individuals who have maybe never visited the state of Iowa or this community, and you talk to them about the very strong Black community that exists here, not just in Iowa City, but all around us. But I think that's really important. And you know, one of those areas that I think serves as a really strong community for our university happens to be the African American Studies program. And so, Orv, was wondering if you could share a little bit about the role of African American Studies, that program, and what it plays in the part of Iowa's Black community as a whole.
The African American Studies program, I mean, basically, it gives an identity. You know, I mean, as a Black person in this university, most of the things that we are attached to are whiteness. You know, with the African American Studies program, I mean, it basically focuses on, you know, the Black culture. It basically focuses on educational needs. It pretty much covers so many areas that is attached to Blackness that this university doesn't have. And I think the most important thing about the African American Studies program having a presence in this university is it basically sends a message to the rest of the country and the world that the University of Iowa is willing to acknowledge Blackness and a need for it.
Great comment, Orv. Michael, Lena, as former faculty here on campus, do you have anything to add to Orv's comments?
Definitely. When I arrived to the University of Iowa as a brand new assistant professor, I'd never known what it meant to be duly appointed in two areas, both in the English department and in African American Studies. And I wasn't sure, was this just going to mean double the meetings? I knew that from my experience of applying and meeting the colleagues I would come to just treasure, that this was going to be a space of inspiration, of collegiality, a space of professional camaraderie, laughter and peace. And really a space of mentorship that in many ways was just embodied by Professor Horace Porter, who I think Michael and I and our family will always be grateful for. People go through their entire professional lives never having a mentor and friend as invested in our success and as, I would say, never waning in that energy and investment in making sure that we really did progress in the way that we needed to. But for our students, and I want to turn things over to Michael. I think the African American Studies is also a space, as Orville just mentioned, that really attested to the commitment on the part of the university to a discipline-specific exploration of African American history and culture, and that was really important. When I moved into an administrative role, I viewed African American Studies from a different vantage, and that was really as a recruiting jewel. As we think about the work of recruiting African-American faculty of excellence, having a program like African-American Studies cannot be overstated how important that is, not just because that allows potential faculty members, and of course we have African-American faculty members across every discipline, but African-American Studies often offers a home where you can exchange ideas and form community. And I think it's something that the institution should be very proud of.
Just following up on that and underscoring three major points. One, in relationship to Brittany, from 2006 to 2018, during the 12 years that I was at the University of Iowa, students unfailingly identified African American Studies courses as spaces where moments of discovery could take place, as spaces where zestful dialogue could take place, in courses like African American celebrity, the art and politics of rap music, African American comics, African American religion. Individuals have the opportunity to explore facets of themselves and to see in an unapologetic way intellectual inquiry going forth in a manner that dignifies your experience, right? And the second thing I want to underscore goes back to something that Brother Townsend mentioned, namely that the African American Studies, African American World Studies, the many cognates, the different incarnations that we've seen at the University of Iowa, is a program like many that rose to national prominence within the context of the aftermath of the assassination of MLK. But a distinguishing factor of African American Studies at the University of Iowa is its focus on graduate education. Unlike many institutions that were creating African American Studies programs, Iowa is amongst the first to grant graduate degrees in the field of African American Studies, which meant that they could staff the profession. And we would be woebegone not to mention the name of Darwin Turner in relationship to drawing the eyes of the nation, but also of the world, to little old Iowa City, right? Like to little old University of Iowa, because the unlikely serendipitous manifestation of a Black subject area zeitgeist within the world of Iowa City, right? Like within the world of the University of Iowa, you know, people are coming here. Francis Smith Foster is one of the foremost scholars of the slave narrative in the world. Francis Smith Foster came to the University of Iowa during NEH seminars that Darwin Turner was putting on. And folks around town, like Joe Henry said, that was like a salon in Paris, right? Like an intellectual smorgasbord, right? Like the folks around town would be like, oh, yeah, you know, we're having Black royalty in intellectual terms up in here. And I believe that speaks to what Brother Townsend was suggesting, a sense of pride and a sense of a kind of, as Lena was suggesting, competitive advantage. And I feel like that, lastly, is what our colleague Venice Berry, who's head of African American Studies currently, is trying to build on aggressively with the center, with the idea that the Midwest, as a broad region, has rich pockets of African American life and experience that are sometimes overlapping, but sometimes distinct from what we see in other spaces. And Iowa very early on created room for people to recognize themselves as amongst fellow travelers when it came to investigating and analyzing African American life.
So were there any events that happened either on campus or nationally that you think impacted your experience as a student, a Black student at the University of Iowa? And this goes out to any of the panelists tonight.
Wow. I think the one that really sticks out in my mind is the trial of Oj Simpson. During our time at the University of Iowa, that trial occurred, and there were pictures of the end of the trial when the verdict came in. And there was a picture of a group of African-American students. And then there was a group of white students. And the African-American students were shown to be excited about the release because of, I think, the interaction of African Americans and the police. And it was seen as a victory because of that interaction. And other students didn't see it as that. And so one of the things that you could see in the University of Iowa, especially for me, is that it was almost like two worlds. It was our world, and then it was the other world, but the other world was the mainstream world. And so we had to navigate that. And so me being Black Student Union president, majoring in African American World Studies, it was like, even though I came from a Black city, that experience, along with the BSU president, along with majoring in African American World Studies, along with learning more about the culture, it was sort of like, Brittany, even though I was from a Black city, I found my Blackness too. And then as I found my Blackness in Iowa City, it prepared me to understand that there was work to be done for other people to understand their Blackness, and also for people that weren't Black to appreciate the diversity of people not like them. And so, you know, the OJ trial showed me that differentness, and then surrounding that is that I was coming to my own as understanding what it meant to be a Black man in America. And then to go on forward in that D&I space, in the government space, teaching that to other people as well. And so that's what comes to mind for me.
Thank you.
I totally, that differentness, I definitely attest to that. One experience that stands out to me, I can't specifically remember what year it was, but there was a year when I was here, there was a KKK statue right in the middle of campus. And I was scared, you know, I was terrified. I was like, I'm in the middle of Iowa, and you know, should I go home? Like, you know, that was my first thought in my head, like, should I go home? Because some people thought it was a joke, you know, and some people were definitely scared, like people of color, Black people like me. So that differentness, I was explicitly able to see in the forefront. Like, some people thought it was a joke and thought it was just art, versus me, versus, you know, a Black person, like, you know, that brings up a lot of like fear, that brings up a lot of past history, that brings up trauma. So I was able to explicitly see the two different sides, but I was also, as a student athlete, you're kind of in that student athlete bubble. But I remember doing that incident, I was connected more so to the Black frats and the Black sororities on campus. I was able to connect more with them, just obviously our Blackness, but I was able to get out of that student athlete side. I'm just like, oh, we're both just Black, like, and we're both kind of scared. We don't know what's going on either. I mean, I know my schedule's more different. I'm more at the LC. I have practice, I have weight, but like, I'm going to come to this meeting after practice because 1, I want the community, and 2, I need the community because I'm scared. There's only a couple Black student athletes. Like, if you expand your community, it feels more safer and at home. And I remember people writing and people wanting to protest and people wanting to just want to do all this stuff to bring awareness and say, this is not an art piece that we want at the University of Iowa. Like, it shouldn't be up. So, yeah, I definitely was able to see that differentness, but I was also catapulted into like different subgroups of, a bigger group, honestly, instead of my student athlete Blackness. I was able to go expand more into that. Not a sad issue, a traumatic thing brought me more into that Blackness. So, it's good and bad to it.
And Brittany, if I'm not mistaken, you were here on campus when Ferguson and those events there were going on. And then now, fast forward to 2020, and we're still dealing with a lot of these same issues. And, we can't separate out what's going on from a national standpoint from what we are feeling here at the university. What do you think is different this year, in terms of student protest, and how have things maybe changed, or are they different now in 2020 than they were back in the days of Ferguson, I guess?
They're definitely different. It's like it feels different. Like, I know everyone's been saying that, but like it really does feel different. Like, it's not like I stated before, like you were able to explicitly see that this is, Black people feel this way and other people don't, white people don't. But now you're able to see that, like, oh, like you may not be able to understand, but this is wrong. So you want to come out and protest with me. You want to go sign the petitions with me. You also want to come to the meeting with me. You don't just want to like, talk about it. Like, you want to be a part of it too. So there is a differences that I see from that time to this time. It's not just becoming, I think a lot of times people are like, well, I don't understand, and I don't know what to do. And it's that doing that's the difference, and it's not the doing of, I need you to understand, because you're not going to understand my experience. Like, I can explain it to you so much, but my, me as a Black woman and me, I see that, and me being in this world, like there's two different parallels, honestly. I think there's a quote from W.E.B. Du Bois where he talks about like that parallel of like me being aware of my Blackness and how it attests, into the world, and how I basically two different things. So you're not going to be able to really understand that, but you do get that it's wrong, and you do want to do some action behind it. So I do see a difference where there's action behind it. Now it's just trying to figure out what is the right step and how do we go about it. But and that comes with a lot. I think a lot of times people want to do it fast and right now, but like, it comes with a lot. There's a lot to do with that change. Like, this is the first time we've all kind of, first time in my knowledge that we've all kind of been together in that. So yeah, I definitely do see a difference.
Thank you, Brittany. Anyone else?
Yeah, I think of news events that, had an impact. And I think back when President John F. Kennedy was assassinated. And that came out, and it was just devastating. But to show you how misinformation can add negatively to it, there was a rumor going around real quick that a Black person had assassinated him, and just that quick with that misinformation, it showed us just how vulnerable we were. I mean, it created a situation where we had to basically come off the street and get together until, real updated, appropriate information was over the air. But to this day, I still find it difficult to believe that, number one, a situation like that, someone would add even more negativity to it by making it race. And basically, I guess when you are a Black person in America, you you never know. You really don't have any guarantees except the ones that you create for yourself.
Very well said. We are going to take a turn in our program tonight, and I know that a few of you have asked us some questions. We will try and get to as many as we possibly can. So the first question that has come up is about the Iowa Alumni Club. And Orb, I know that you are very much involved in the Iowa Black Alumni Association. Do you want to just talk about the role of that group and what it means to former Black alumni here at Iowa?
Yes. The Iowa Black Alumni, group was, it's basically a group of a number of Blacks that have graduated from the University of Iowa, but we also changed that and made it Black Alumni and Friends, so that you don't have to be a graduate in order to participate. But the Iowa Black Alumni was created, back in the 60s when a group of Blacks that had graduated from the university decided that they should get together and spend some time together. So they took a weekend and kind of met at one of the alumni's house. And, it went so well that they just decided to keep it up. So it's gone over the years, and up to this date, basically, we are still encouraging, anyone that would like to participate, to do so. We give 2 scholarships every year, to minority students. So basically, we are definitely encouraging the education of our students in terms of trying to acquire excellence.
Wonderful. Thanks, Orv. Really appreciate that. Our next question is, do you find that white colleagues at the University of Iowa are more or less inclined to be an ally than at other places where you have lived? And this can go to any of the panelists.
I'll bite on that. I'm not on the campus, but basically, I find that Blacks in Iowa, they're basically really focused on their succeeding. There are a lot of obstacles that, they have to acquire to, get over. And it takes a lot of time. So I think basically it's not just everybody's bubbly. I think there's a cautions built-in self-preservation for Blacks.
I'll add to that. So as I mentioned, I arrived at the University of Iowa as an assistant professor, and I had some of the most committed mentors in the form of colleagues, many of whom were white and went beyond just, reading drafts of articles and book chapters to always being ready to invite us over. And those were friendships. So when I think of allyship is definitely, can you depend on those who will work beside you toward goals that may not impact them personally, but impact the community, the society they live in. And I definitely found that at the University of Iowa. But to me, more important many times, or as important, I would say, is the University of Iowa a place where I found white colleagues who I can call friend? And I would say yes, without pausing. I'm still, I'm still really fortunate to be in touch with many of my colleagues and friends. And I count that as a blessing, and it's something I would tell anyone. And if you come to Washington and Lee and ask them, what do the Hills think of Iowa? Anyone will tell you. We always say, I will always bleed a little black and gold. It's a special place, and so I think of allyship as, will you work with me? But I'm really proud to say that not only was it a place of allies, but a place of friends and colleagues.
Thanks, Lena. Brittany, we have a question for you. What brought you from California to Iowa? Why Iowa? Brittany, you're muted. There you go.
Sorry, I was muted. So I came here in 2013, I believe. I came here on a track scholarship. What brought me to Iowa was I came here on a visit. It was a very community type like feel when I came here on my visit. I trusted my coach. And yeah, I really didn't have I didn't really know much about the community, just what I had seen, you know, honestly on my visit. But yeah, that's basically what drew me to Iowa. And now I'm obviously still here living and training, kind of stuck here at this point. You know, I feel like when you come here, you're kind of just like, the more you stay here, I'm just like, oh, I kind of like it a little bit more. I kind of like it a little bit more. And then you're like, oh, I'm still here. So yeah, I just was brought here just because a feeling, honestly, you know, I just felt like it was the best for me. And that's what I tell people all the time, trust your intuition. And yeah.
Thanks, Brittany. So here's another question for the entire group. What does the future look like for Blacks, in your opinion, at the University of Iowa? And I'm going to take that question actually a step further and say, what advice would you give to the individuals who work here on campus, maybe individuals who are in leadership positions? What advice would you give to them on how we best prepare for the future of Iowa?
I think that it's, I don't know, I think that it's hard work. It's not something to take lightly. It's not something to take for granted, because there are good experiences, and like we have been stating, but there are some bad experiences that we have talked about too. So it's not to be taken lightly, and it's not to be rushed. I feel like a lot of times people want to rush it. And they want it now, and it should be done this way. But I feel like sometimes, for me as a track athlete, I know anything that's rushed isn't going to be done well. A fast runner is very relaxed and it's very methodical in what you do and how you plan it out. So it's a lot of planning. It's a lot of strategic to try to get all the parts of it, because there are a lot of parts. There's some questions I've seen about engineering. There's a lot of parts that come with it. So it's hard to try to reach every part and try to have everyone be seen and heard. But it's a lot of collaboration that has to be done. That's what we've kind of been talking about too. But yeah, not to be taken lightly and to have a methodical plan to it. And yeah.
You know, I feel that if, you know, you're going to work with Black students, you have to first make a commitment to yourself. And that is that you're going to go the extra mile. You know, you can't expect the individual to be like you, to think like you, to respond like you, because the individuals come from a totally different environment that basically hasn't prepared that person for those type of things, hasn't helped that person to shape thinking that will be successful, you know. So basically, I think you're going to have to make a commitment with yourself to really look at the individual, get to know the individual, but also get to know something about that individual's history. And you're going to have to kind of put yourself in that person's shoes before you'll be able to walk with them. If you don't do that, you and that individual can walk that path together, but you'll be separate, you'll be apart. You have to become one, help that person to become one.
Yes, what I would say is we need to really try to achieve sustainability. The history of the University of Iowa is filled with ebb and flow, seasons of ebb and flow. It struck me as individuals were talking about the Tanya Lokar incident on campus, talking about Ferguson on campus. something else that happened during the course of that particular span on campus is that Barack Obama launched a successful presidential campaign by having a phenomenal showing in Iowa, right? Like that was a moment where people began to see him emerging from the margins and moving to the center in relationship to his potential campaign. So much so that Ta-Nehisi Coates, nationally syndicated columnist and Mark MacArthur grant recipient now, subsequently came to Iowa, and I had to call. I asked him. I said, "You remember when you were saying you couldn't understand what was going on in Iowa?" And he was like, "Yeah, you know." But that simultaneity defines mountaintop moments. You know, echoing what Brittany was saying about the Black Baptist Church, right? Like the mountaintop moment is when everybody's happy and everybody's celebrating and everybody's excited, but too often that's followed by a valley experience. And what we want to do is to maintain some sense of sustainability. We need to build not just for homecoming, Easter, and Christmas. We need to build for something that is going to be sustainable across the arc of a long-range plan. And so that would be my sort of advice, is to build for the long range, right? Like build for the long haul, build for a span that could be sustained, as opposed to building for a special occasion.
So this hour has gone by very fast tonight, and there's still a lot of questions that we didn't have a chance to get to, but I'm going to end on this particular note. One last question, and this goes out to anyone who cares to answer, and that is, if you were to give advice to an African-American student here at the University of Iowa who may feel like they do not have the support that they need, what advice would you give to that particular person? And or if there's a white colleague in the audience tonight who is working with students of color, what advice would you give to that white colleague in terms of their interactions with African-American students here on campus?
Let me answer that. Because I was a student that struggled at Iowa, and so I would later go on to get on the dean's list and graduate and all that good stuff. But one of the things that when I came back from suspension that helped me to be successful is that I got mentors who were students, and then I reached out to members of the faculty and of staff. And at the time it was Special Support Service, Opportunity at Iowa. And I made sure to let people know when I was having difficulty and when I was struggling. And they then had so much, people like Nancy Humbles. I mean, these people had so much just understanding, or just how to straighten you out if you were having some issues. What were some things to say? They could be the faculty member, or they could be the auntie, or they could be the combination of both people, both personas. And so I would tell people to reach out. Don't allow yourself to be isolated. Don't allow yourself to think that you are doing it by yourself, and don't think that you are the first person to go through what you are going through, whether it's with a professor, whether it's with another student, whether it is with something at your job. It has happened before, and there are people there that want to help you, that are Black and that are white.
In a situation like that, I think one thing that I would do is I would encourage that person to be our guest at Bethel AM Church, basically. And if the person, went along with that, then it would be the beginning, because there's just so many things would be there. There's a religious aspect, but then, there's just people that's willing to be a part of helping a person with the problem. And, there are meals periodically, so I think basically that's one thing that my wife and I have done. And, personally, I feel that it's been extremely successful over the years.
I was going to say, the question kind of alluded to like the professors or anyone trying to be like ally or something in that sort. There was one time there was a professor that I was talking to, and she was white, and I was explaining to her like the differences of us and how I grew up, and she was trying to explain something to me, and she just really didn't like understand where I was coming from, so she was treating me in a different way. So I think a lot of times for like professors or just anyone, like everyone has implicit bias, and that's basically, you know, something that we all, you know, you unknowingly judge people. And when I sat down and explained to her, and she's like, oh, I didn't even realize, like, you know, and that was the aha moment. So to any, you know, professor or just anyone, like, because even I do have my own implicit bias in certain people. So check that, check your own self. Check how you are approaching people before you are, you know, what biases do you already have about them when you are beginning to talk to them? Is that true? Is that not true? Are you willing to discuss it or not? Because we all have it. And you know, the situation could have been totally different until I had to sit down and explain to her, like, you know, we just grew up differently. Like, you know, you explain it to me in this way, I'm not going to get it. I'm just not. Like, and I'm also a student athlete, so I don't really have time to. So I need you to know that right now, like, you need to explain it to me in this way. So yeah, check yourself. Check yourself, and you know, before you approach anyone else, because that goes for professors and that goes for students, because, you know, like I said, I even have my own, we all do, but self-awareness is key, especially with dealing with race, issues of race. I think it's very key. Yeah.
I would echo all of my panelists. One thing I would add in speaking to Black students, when Michael and I worked on Invisible Hawkeyes, we were able to do research on African American students who came to the University of Iowa between the 1930s and the 1960s. And as we discovered the stories of, you know, Elizabeth Catlett and Margaret Walker and Thomas Pauley and Fannie Ellison, what we realized was there is a long history of African American students coming to the University of Iowa and excelling and being excellent at what they did. And they did that in really difficult circumstances. And I hope that our students today can understand that they stand on the shoulders of giants, that they are not, sometimes you come and you don't think a space is yours. I encourage you to claim your experience at the University of Iowa. There, you are walking in the paths and footsteps of trailblazers who have accomplished so much and opened many doors, and you walk right on through them. What I would say to colleagues, to white professors, recognize and nurture potential that comes in packages you might not be familiar with. One of my greatest joys was working with talented Black students at the University of Iowa, many of whom I'm still in touch with. I had a great conversation with a former student, and Michael's thinking I'm talking about a panel last week. And believe you me, we are still promoting our students from Iowa here, our alumni. But actually, this student I'm thinking of is now working on his PhD in English. And he still reaches out to me. We still talk about every step he's walking in. And I'm so glad that he felt comfortable reaching out and that we were able to form that relationship. But we can't wait for students to reach out. When you see someone who has a spark of talent, or when you see someone who you think, wow, wonder why they haven't spoken up, wonder why they haven't come to office hours. Maybe they don't know that those are some of the steps that you should take. And I know I'm not saying anything that is mind-shattering, but my point is that we have to recognize, be willing to nurture and promote potential across all races and however our students come to us. And not just because it's the right thing to do, but because we want to continue to, this is the work of higher education, is to continue to bring students in to a wonderful institution, to give them opportunities they otherwise would not have, and then to watch them excel. and all that they give back, not just to their alma mater, not just to their community, not just to their nation, but to the world. And that's what we are witnessing now as we watch many of our students at Iowa, many of our Black students go on and achieve so much.
Wonderful, wonderful comments tonight. Let me just say thank you to all of our panelists. It has been a pleasure to know all of you in many capacities, you know, throughout my time here at Iowa. Michael and Lena, I don't know if there will ever be a time in which you all want to come back to Iowa, but at any point in time, we'd gladly take you. But with that being said tonight, thank you all so much for your questions. I'm sorry that we weren't able to get to all of them. As your panelists shared stories with you this evening, we've made a list of some of the resources referenced, and we'll be sending those out to all the attendees in the next few days. And in the interim, you can learn more about the Iowa Black Alumni Association, of which ORV is a part of, and the Iowa Black Alumni Network, of which Royce is a part of, by visiting foriowa.org/groups. So you will have the opportunity to complete a survey tonight, which I believe they've posted in the chat, to share your thoughts about tonight's event. As Brittany's experience has shown, we appreciate hearing your ideas and hope to develop future programming that will be of interest to you. So with that being said, thank you all so much for joining us tonight, and go Hawks.